Hello. All right. So this is the second time I tried to record this. This is about going over. I sent out a questionnaire to people about how they're spending their time in 342 for us to try to analyze and understand it. I did this long lecture. Then I talked to some more people and I had more thoughts about it. I'm going to do it over, and I'm going to do it this time in two parts. I'm going to go over the results, and then in a separate video, I'm going to talk about what I think the solution is. All right. So, in other words, if you don't care about the results of the questionnaire and just want to skip ahead to the solution, you're welcome to do that. But for those of you who are curious, for example, you participated in it, this is what it is. This is what it is. These are the results. I had 39 people respond. That's basically half the class, which is really nice. One of the things I want to start with, besides talking about the time estimates, is I think everyone is really good at making comparisons. And this is just like in doing estimation of stories. It's easier to compare stories and say, I think this one's harder than this one, than it is to say how many hours something is. So when I have you estimate the number of hours, it's kind of tricky. People aren't keeping detailed time logs and stuff. But I do know that everyone can have a good sense of, from one course to the next, how much work there is. And so let's actually take a look at that. I asked you to compare 342 to 121 and 240, so Introduction to Programming, Algorithms and Data Structures, and then 245. 121 and 240 was not taught by me, although I know those courses quite well. I used to teach them. And then 245, which you had with me last spring, and was the first time it's ever been offered. And we certainly saw that at points in time it was way too much work. We worked to make it better, more reasonable. I think we kind of got there by the end, but there's still a fair amount of work in that course, certainly, especially because it was very homework driven, as opposed to, oh, we're just going to have you study for tests and quizzes and stuff. Anyways, so I asked you to compare to the other course. Are you working more than twice as hard, more than the other, but not more than twice as hard, about the same as in the other course? You're doing less than the other course, or less than half of what the other course was. So first of all, no one is doing less than half. Who responded to this survey? What we do see, and I think 245 isn't the best test, again, because it was this messed up. It wasn't messed up, but it has some growing pains still. In comparison, we've got 121 and 240, which I think are nicely established courses. Now, perhaps the instructor you had for them didn't make you do as much work, but let's just let's assume that they did have you do as much as when I did it. What we have in 121, and what is it basically, the idea is you've got your 3 hours of lecture, that's normal. You do have 2 hours of tutorial. And then we strive, at least I always did, basically there's a weekly homework unless you've got a midterm. And so you tend to hit about 5 to 7 hours is sort of the expectation, expectation being sort of the average. Some people might be a little bit more, some people a little bit less, but a good solid sort of peak around 5 to 7 hours. And then that's the sweet spot for the homework. And we're very clear to tell students that if they're spending more time than that, they should be seeking help. That's in line with basically the university norm, so to speak, for a course, such that if you've had 5 courses, you're probably going to put in about 60 to 65 hours a week on average. Now, that does not mean every course is exactly this many hours. What it means is that on average, the average student will spend about that. Some will spend more, some will spend less. Some courses will be easier, actually, and you'll spend less in those courses. Some courses will probably be harder, and you'll spend more in those courses, such that for over the term, your average course is probably going to be, you're probably total time, all your lectures, tutorials, studying, everything that you do for that course is probably around that mark. And that's certainly where I think we hit with 121 and 240, which are not easy courses. by any way stretch of the means. And so I think that's a good comparison point. So with that as a comparison point, 342 people are spending too much time. We've got half of the respondents saying they're spending twice as much time. So that would be spending, 20 to 24 some hours or so in 342 per week. Some are spending, 37% are spending more time. About 11% are saying it's about the same. 3% actually were spending somehow less time in 342 than in those other courses. I do expect some people play around with the data. Maybe some people want to make a point, but in fact, they're like, oh, I'll just say everything's a lot of work. But I believe that there are enough students in this course who seriously care to try to answer these questions honestly, that on the whole, the picture is what matters, the whole picture, and we can trust and we can believe you what you said, okay? So when I've got half my respondents telling me they're doing twice as much work, or it feels that way, that says people are doing too much work in 342. That's as plain and simple as it can be, okay? Now, what does that really mean? This is where let's go and spend some time and look at the hours people are putting in or reporting that they're putting in. And again, these are people's estimates. And what I find nice about collecting enough data, 38 data points is actually a lot. When we have that many people responding, sure, some person estimates too much, one person estimates too little, but the average, we start to, those things cancel out and we get a pretty good estimate of what really is going on. And so I asked people for average hours per sprint. Remember that your sprints, you know this well, but these are 2 weeks long, okay? We broke things down into time you're spending on designing stuff, coding things, working on your pull requests, both writing them and reviewing them, and the other meetings that you might be holding with people. These are outside of the Scrum meetings, which are designed to fit within the 3 hours a week for lab. So what did people tell me? So this is average. So we've got 2.7 hours here, 12 hours of coding, 3.4 hours of pull requests, and 4.2 hours of other meetings. Now, when I take each person's individual amount, sum them up, okay, and then take the average of that sum, we get per week, we get averages of 11.1 hours per week. In total, people are spending on these activities, and we get a median time of 9.5 hours per week. Okay. And so one of the things this points out is, since the average is greater than the median, we've got a skew. It's actually quite a bit more, about 1.5 hours more. And so things are skewed towards the greater end of the spectrum. And I'll talk about that in a moment. If you go and put this all together then, so again, we have lab, which is 3 hours a week. And what do we do in lab? These are all of our Scrum meetings. We do sprint planning, stand-up, sprint reviews, and sprint retrospectives. And you're like, well, we don't all hold them all during lab. Yes, but once you sum up all their time, those meetings sum up to basically over the whole sprint, 3 hours a week. So we've got this 3 hours per week. Then, by the way, we have people reported about lecture. quiz, reading, all of that. That came in as estimated as 4.5 hours per week. All right, so if we take the 3, the 4.5, and the 11.1, so if we go 11.1, 4.5, 3.0, 6, and then 5, 8, we've got 18.6 hours a week if we're talking about the average. Okay. If we were to use the median, instead we go 9.5, 4.5, 3.0. When you look at the lecture quiz, it's not really skewed, so this is fine. The median is basically the same as the average. 1, 10, 14, 17 hours. So depending upon how you cut it and how you look at what the average is, because average really shouldn't have this skew to it. Maybe median's a better estimator for us. Maybe 17 hours a week. So if we wanted to get this down to even the, let's just say we wanted to get it down to about 12 from the 17, or get the 18 closer to 13, we need to drop somewhere between 5 and 6 hours. We have 5 to 6 hours excess effort on people's part approximately in this course per week. What else do we know about what's going on there? So that's that data. Yeah, so people are putting in too much time. What are some of the other things that we see? When you look at the distribution of time, one of the things that's interesting about it is that it looks as follows. So if we look at total project, time per week, you're going to get a distribution that kind of looks like this. All right. So this is where the skew comes from, and actually I'll try to make that a little bit more properly peaked. That's a little better. Anyway, so this in here, this is in the range of somewhere between 7 and 10 hours. It's just barely, our median is really close. This sort of divides things up pretty nicely. Maybe this really should be, I don't know. Yeah, so median comes close to where the peak is, by the way, which sort of, again, reminder, median was 9.5, I believe. Yeah, 9.5 hours per week. All right. Why do I want to show you this? One of the problems that we face is we have this long tail, not log, long tail of very either hard workers or people who are spending just tons of time for some reason. I'm sure it's because they're working hard. Now, the problem is these folks are way outside of the norm of what the rest of their class and their is doing. We really want to see this distribution behave like this, and if anything, be shifted back a little bit too. So one of the things I want to talk about then is when we were going to get to the solution, one of the things I'm going to talk about though is people need to keep in mind, all right, this is what's happening with our class. And that's total time, everything you're doing on the project, excluding the lab meetings. So that would be, your 15-minute stand-up. If your stand-ups are running longer than that, that's other meetings that you're having. Your sprint planning, your sprint review, your retrospective. All right. So if you're down here, you should try to push yourself towards the center. If you're out here, you should really try to pull yourself back in. Or if you're out here and you're doing it because you love it, it's exciting, it's fun, you want to spend all this time, you're learning tons of stuff. I'm not going to tell you that you have to not work so hard. I think it's important, though, that you not be complaining about it. Maybe you're not. But if you're out at this end, you really are putting in way too much time because your classmates are not putting in that much time, okay? So when you tell me you're putting in 20 hours on the project a week, that's way different than there's half of the class who's putting in less than 9.5 hours a week on the project, okay? And if you're putting in 20, whoa, think about that. That means probably good, 85% of the students or 90% of the students are putting in less time than you. That doesn't seem right. You should be a lot closer in here to these people. You still might be here. I'd love it if everyone fit into a nice tight bell curve and it'd be fine. Okay, you're putting in the most time for the class, but it's not that far off. But when you're out here, it's just not right. And so I'm concerned about that. All right. This is one last thing, part of the survey that I put out there was I asked people to compare themselves to their teammates. Okay, so compared yourself to your 342 teammates, and we had this notion of you feel like you're working twice as hard as them, you are working more than the average person, you're working about the average, you're working less than the average, or less than half the average. And what we had reported was one person said they felt like they were working twice. I think this person was actually not answering correctly because they put in things like, yeah, I'm doing 3 hours of coding. I'm 1 hour, like their total amount of project time per project was something like 5 hours. But then they said they were working twice as hard. Either they didn't understand the questions or what, but this basically is no one is actually willing to say, I'm working twice as hard as my teammates. But we do have 39% of these folks saying they are doing more than average. We've got about 55% saying, yeah, we're average. And then lo and behold, we've got like one person willing to say they're less than average. Okay. All right. Just a moment. All right. Coming back, I wanted to check some numbers. So when we look at the amount of time these people are reporting, the people who feel like they're working about average for their group, they report that they're working 9.25 hours per week. This is on the project. This is all the stuff that they're doing on the project, excluding the lab. Okay, and this is doesn't include the lecture and reading and studying. This is project time. So 9.25 hours. And what's really interesting about it is, to me, these people who feel they're about average are about average. That's a really neat thing. So their sense is probably pretty good. But keep in mind, if you were like, yeah, I feel average, and you're putting in 16 hours a week, you're not actually average. Likewise, if you said, you feel average and you're doing 4 hours a week, you're not average. Okay. The average of the people saying they're average is pretty average. So that's a good sign. Now, with regard to where the peak of the average is, of course, we know the total distribution's average is 11.1. But of where really the peak is and the bulk of people, sort of the center, the true center of the distribution, yeah, these people are sensing the center of the distribution and they're in there. That is correct. The people who are feeling like I'm doing more than other people, they're putting 14.25 hours per week. Okay, so they've got a whole extra 5 hours a week that they're estimating that they're doing. Yeah, so they feel like they're doing more. In relative to the people who say they feel like they're doing average, the people who feel like they're doing more are doing more. And in fact, an extra 5 hours over this, that's a good 50% more work, time put in on the project. So yeah, as opposed to being around here, these people are out over here. And there's a whole bunch of them. And again, it's this part of this issue is this long tail. Okay. So, again, think about how you feel. If you feel like you're putting in a lot more than other people and your time estimate tells you you're actually putting in more, maybe you scale back. If you're feeling average, you're probably fine. Maybe you still want to scale back, who knows. But if you're actually, your time estimates, you're like, ooh, my time estimates were a lot less than other people, maybe you're not actually average and maybe you should be moving up. Certainly, we would expect if this distribution was to be correct, that we would have an equal amount of people who are below average and above average, and it would be centered on average, but it's not. Things are shifted towards respondents saying, I'm either average or I'm working harder than the other people. Sure, this seems to be correct, but where are these people? Did they not respond to the survey? I actually think they did respond to the survey, and I think this is just one of these things that's tricky, is like when we perceive things, we are going to tend to perceive, we're more aware of our own work, and it's hard to judge others. So I think you're likely to either feel like you're doing average or you're doing more work than other people. And here certainly it trends that way. It's hard, I think, for people to admit they feel like they're doing less. And then again, maybe those people actually, the people who feel like they're doing less, did not want to actually respond to the survey. And they're like, why would I bring down the results? Let all those people who feel like they're working too hard respond, because I'm having a grand old time on this team. I don't know. I actually don't think that's the case. I actually think I got a fair distribution of people across this distribution, okay? And I just think that part of asking you with respect to your teammates, it points out how hard it is for us to really make comparisons of ourselves to other people. And this is, again, why we really shouldn't be doing so much of that, as we should just be trying to do our own good job and try to keep within the expectations of the manager. So the manager says, hey, you should be doing this project, maybe hopefully only about 6 hours per week. All right, great, 6 hours per week. That would be a lot better than 9.5. How are you going to know if you're spending that amount of time? You can keep a time log. Honestly, keep yourself a little time log. If you ever feel like it, you could even share it with me. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see where you actually spend your time. So if you find yourself, wow, I've put in already, I sat down at the computer today, I banged out, 3 hours. Okay, keep that in mind. Like, budget your time in the course. Try to keep yourself time outside of the basic Scrum meetings. Try to keep it down closer to my expectations, and that might actually help some things. Now, I don't want to get too much into the solution aspect of things. I want to save that for the next video. But this is overall the results. Look, people feel like they're putting in more time based upon their hour than like 121 and 240. Based upon their hours, they are. But also some of the things that we note is that we've got this problem with this real skew in the class, and we've got a whole bunch of people. I would say this is probably like 15% of the class. Okay, so really there should be I actually estimate, I think that about 15% of the students really should be answering and saying they're working twice as hard as their average teammate. So basically, there's probably one person per team who, if you compare them to the median amount of work and effort on a team, they're probably putting in twice the amount of the median work. Okay, and likewise, by the way, often I have a sense that the median or average amount of work is twice as much as the person doing the least amount of work. There is potentially a spread of a factor of 4 between the person doing the least and the person doing the most. I'd really like to see that come a lot closer on the teams. If the teams are sort of compensating naturally, but that's not what we want, because we're getting some people who are putting out gigantic amounts of time. Those people shouldn't be having to do that. Everyone should be working their own proper share of time on this project. All right, so that's enough of those about the results. I'm going to come back and give you my thoughts on a solution.